Welcome, everyone. My name is Frank Anderson, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. I'm not seeing myself quite yet, so I think Sarah will be able to help. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that view. Show actor speakers video. Let's see. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just make this work. Yes, I'm Frank Anderson, and I am thrilled to be here today. Um, I really feel honored that the IFS Institute has asked me to be a participant in these calls, these free webinars that the IFS Institute is offering to people in our community because we're all in a time of need right now, that's for sure. And so I'm really grateful that they have given me this opportunity to um, be a part of this community and to share with the community some of what we're all experiencing today. We're so fortunate to have some speakers that will be sharing their story with us today, and you'll get to meet them shortly. So I'm really grateful to them. And I also wanted to send out a shout out to John Schwartz, the CEO of the Institute, because this is really his brainchild. He's the one that had this idea. He said, Frank, so many of us are experiencing so many different things. Wouldn't it be neat if we were able to share it together as a community? And I just jumped on that idea. I thought it was a great idea. I love the fact of us kind of getting together and being able to share as a community. So I want to just thank John for coming up with that idea. And again, I'm just so humbled and honored to be able to be the vehicle in today's webinar. As we all know, these are really unprecedented times, right? Nobody, I don't think anybody in this room has ever seen anything like this before. This is new for all of us. It's unprecedented for sure. One of the things that I'm experiencing myself personally, as well as I'm seeing in all of my clients, is this thing that I'm kind of labeling right now a double trauma. I'm seeing people really be activated by what's going on in the current day situation. And I'm also experiencing within myself, but also seeing within so many of my clients, the other layer of stuff that's getting activated for everyone. So I thought this was a good opportunity to kind of even just look at that a little bit. And one of the things that I'm aware of, and so grateful to IFS for offering us this concept and this idea of self energy. Because for me, self energy is kind of the savior here in all of this. It's really what enables us to be able to handle and be in the present in a different kind of way. But it also allows us to be with and heal and deal with our past in a very different way. So I'm eternally grateful to that. Some of the things that I'm seeing, I'm kind of noticing these range of responses that I see in people, that some people are having this kind of range of current day experiences, right? Oh, no big deal. This is nothing. Why is everybody making a big deal of this? To, oh my God, hysterically hoarding toilet paper, flour, amongst other things. So there's that response. And I'm also seeing some pretty rational responses too. So I've really seen the range here, and I've felt the range personally throughout the course of this. Um, I'm also seeing people, and I've experienced some of this too, like stuff coming up for the first time ever from my history. I had no idea that this was inside. So it's an opportunity for new stuff to show up too. Before we start hearing from the speakers, I wanted to share a personal story for me, just to give you guys a sense of, what I've been going through. And it really started for me, um, I was going to say the beginning of first or second week of March. And it was kind of the beginning of the end is the way that I think about it, because I was doing my typical thing. I was going on a 2-day conference, traveling to Minneapolis to do a workshop on IFS. And I left, and the world was kind of the way we knew it. And then in the midst of that 3 or 4 days, the world had changed. I think it was the first time the president had come on TV speaking about this, and there was this shift that occurred for me, and for at least in the States, certainly the world has been dealing with this on that global pandemic way. But for me, there was this shift that occurred while I was away. And I started getting so panicky. I started freaking out while I was in Minneapolis. Oh my God, am I going to be able to get home? Am I going to be able to take the flight? I've got asthma. I'm going to catch this thing. I was terrified. And I had another day of teaching. So I was kind of like, Frank, you've got to get it together here. You can't teach in this way. I was so aware of the activation that I was experiencing. And, luckily, I had IFS to draw on. I went inside. I took a look at what was going on, and there was this just panicked little boy. He was freaking out, and he was like, he's on the right-hand side of me, and he was running around, darting around, left and right, left and right. Get me out of here. Get me out of here. I got to get out of here. And I was a bit taken aback by that, honestly. I hadn't expected that. It wasn't a part that I really had known before. And he was like scurrying, running around. And I just sat with him for a little bit. And it really brought me back to kind of being at home in my house, like terrified, running around, looking for an exit. Looking for an exit. And I remember that as a child in my experience, but it also just came flooding up for me in the midst of my being out of town. And I had enough self around, I really did. And I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, oh, honey, look at me, I'm here. And he just turned up and looked at me. He was shocked. Like he had no idea I existed. And he was just kind of dumbfounded. And I could just remember him looking up at me with those big eyes. And I was like, I've got this. You can trust me. And he kind of felt my power. He felt my strength, and he just kind of softened. It was really remarkable for me, the way he just kind of relaxed. And he's like, you take this one. I can't handle this. And it shifted. There was a shift that occurred in me. And I was really able to navigate the rest of that trip from self. I was able to think clearly, not make decisions based on my past. And it was quite remarkable for me and for my little one. And I know there's an opportunity in there for me to work with him around what he's still carrying. But in that moment, when he got updated that I was around, it shifted everything for me in that moment. So it's a story that I wanted to share with you, some of what I've been experiencing. And I certainly had the range of different things that have been going on for me. I've noticed that people, again, have these different ranges, and some people I see get totally activated. And I've also seen the other. I've seen the other people get totally withdrawn, isolated, disconnected, and everything in between. What I'd like to do now is I want to turn things over to Penny. She'll be our first speaker, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what she's been experiencing and what's been going on for her through this pandemic. So let's welcome Penny.
Hi, everybody. Oh, it's so great to be here, and I'm noticing this part of me that's just feeling scared, and there are 326 people on the call. So I just want to take a minute to soothe that part of me and to know that, we really are all connected. And Frank was talking about that gamut that he sees from this end to that end, and I will say that my parts are all the way along that spectrum. It depends on the minute, depends on the day. But the thing I think I really wanted to share about today is the parts that are coming up around food, and I imagine that I'm not alone. So I also had that similar experience where, like, right at the beginning of March, there was a sudden shift from like, oh, there's this thing happening, to like, oh, it's happening. And I remember my first trip to the grocery store at that time, and noticing that there was this energy in the air and people were panicked and there was no toilet paper and all this stuff. And I, at that moment, felt like, this is really like, why are people so upset if everybody would just whatever. And I did my shopping and I bought what I needed and I stocked my pantry. And I'm fortunate enough to have a second freezer in my basement, and I cooked and I filled it. And then I started to notice that some part of me was thinking about food all the time. All the time. I'd be trying to go to sleep. I'd be sitting in meditation, and up would come these little parts, all kinds of things about food, like, do you have enough? Or maybe we should make that, or maybe we should go get that. And it felt like food insecurity, fear. I'm not going to have enough. I'm not going to have enough. What if I don't have enough? How am I going to keep getting fresh greens? Because I can't keep going to the store because I'm so scared of getting this thing. I'm in that over 60 dangerous age range. And it just kept coming and coming. And I would sit with it, and there it would be. I could not stop thinking about food. And then it was often followed, like I'd have this realization, oh, there's a part of me that's really scared that there's not going to be enough food. And then I'd get this big wave of shame that I was having those feelings because my house is full of food. I have resources. I have all these things. I'm so fortunate and so grateful. And I'm really in touch with that part. And why am I having all this fear about food and all this shame around my fear? So I really took some time to really sit with that and to ask that part of me, what's going on? What do you need? What's happening here? And I got really flooded with a lot of like childhood memories. And I remembered that my mother had a lot of stuff about food. I grew up in a household where food was all built around how much it cost or how fattening it was. So there was always this sense that the things we really wanted, all the things our friends were eating, that was too expensive. We weren't buying that. And all the yummy stuff was too fattening. She was always on a diet. We're not going to have that in the house. And then there would be holidays and company where everything came out. She'd make these amazing meals, but mostly not for us. And I realized that like that had a profound effect on my relationship with food. And I'm somebody who loves food and thinks about food and cooks and reads cookbooks and magazines and all the rest of that. And I'm a great cook. And one of my greatest pleasures is to make fabulous food for people that I love. And I realized that, you know, as I got older and started to cook for myself, food was one of the places where my mom and I connected, one of the few places that we could talk about food and exchange recipes, and I could cook for her. And it was a way that we connected really throughout her life, all the way until she died. And at the very end, when she was really sick, she said, you know, I'm sick when I don't want to eat. And so there was this awareness that, this stuff about food is somehow really connected to my childhood, really trauma around food. Is there enough food? It's too fattening. It's too expensive. And as I explored it more, I realized that not only did my mother have all the stuff about food, which she laid on me as a kid, that my grandmother was somebody who escaped from Europe during the pogroms. And her mother, my great grandmother, was poor, living in a shtetl in Eastern Europe somewhere. And that, you know, as a Jewish person, it's not a far stretch to imagine that there's food insecurity for generations and generations and generations. And that this is a legacy burden. And that I could give it back, that I did not need to carry this burden for my mother and my grandmother and my great grandmother. And that was a huge awareness for me, just amazing. And I would love to report, and I have not had a single insecure thought about food since then. But that is not what has happened. But what has happened is that there's space now for self leadership, for myself to come in and hold that part of me in compassion when that fear comes up of, oh my God,
Right.
there's no flour left on the shelves. How am I going to bake bread? It's like, oh, it's okay. I can remember that this is a little girl inside that just needs to be reassured that there is enough, that I will take care of her, that there is enough food, and that I do not have to carry this burden for my entire ancestral line around food. And then I can shift to being grateful for what I do have. So I really am grateful for the process, for, first of all, internal family systems, which has really helped me, and the ability to work with this with my clients, because just like Frank, I'm seeing the range with the people that I'm working with. And it's just such a powerful model. And, I think everybody's got food stuff, whether it's eating too much. I did that same thing too. At first, the anxiety was so much, I lost my appetite. And then as things settle down, it's like, oh, now I'm eating everything in sight. So, I can continue to do this work to try to balance it, and, and know that I'm not alone, that piece of the common humanity of remembering that this is such a human thing. So I'm really happy to be able to share today. I hope that someone can relate and that it's helpful to you. So thanks for inviting me, Frank.
Yeah, you're welcome, Penny. Thank you so much for sharing. I so much got activated in me as you were talking, and I could totally relate. One of the things that I would say around, I don't know anybody who doesn't have food issues, honestly,
Right.
in one way or another.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that we can't eliminate. We have to have a relationship with it, and we all have a history with it. Here's a little secret that I'll divulge in my food related stuff. I haven't worn a pair of pants in 5 weeks. I'm only wearing sweatpants, and I can even show you them again. It's like, I don't know what it's gonna be like for me to put a pair of pants on again, because I'm in that eat to soothe kind of place throughout the day. And my husband's such a great cook, so I'm really aware of what's going on for me around food. So thank you so much for sharing
My
what
pleasure.
you're sharing around that. All right. What I want to kind of shift to right now a little bit is I'm also aware that there was this acute phase, right? We were all in this acute phase around. So Sarah, I think we need to shift the camera. I'm not quite sure if everybody's seeing again. It seems like that needs to be in your control. Whatever. Okay, I'll just continue. I'm not sure who people are seeing, but that's fine. There was this acute phase of, oh my gosh, what's happening? Oh my gosh, what's happening? And then there's this settling in. There's this settling into this new normal, even though it's, thanks, Sarah, this new normal, even though it's temporary. One of the things that my son said, which was kind of bizarre, but it really was kind of funny, I think, in some ways, but it brought to light for me. He was talking about coronication. In the beginning, like, he's a teenager and he's like, oh my God, this is great, coronication. And I'm taking a video every day. It was like an extended vacation for these kids from school. But even I noticed as life has settled and shifted and changed in this way, he's like, I'm tired of coronication. I want to get back to my friends. I want to get back to school. I want to get back to my life. So I'm aware that there is this shift that we're occurring, the newness and the newness and the shock and awe of what was happening, and then what we're settling into now, and what we're going to be settling into, because we don't really know that. That's kind of new territory for us in this way. I have this thing that is really kind of striking for me, and this is that, where are we right now? What is this place that we're in? I wake up in the middle of the night and I go to the bathroom, and my brain is still back in the old way we were. And I wait, and it takes me a couple minutes to say, oh, that's right. This is what's happening now. Like, I'm so aware that my nervous system and my whole being hasn't quite caught up to this new normal. And it takes me a couple minutes when I'm kind of in that fog to say, oh, yeah, this is happening. This is the current way. It's not what it used to be. So I think we're all in the process of kind of sorting this whole thing out in all these different ways. So I wanted to kind of just name that a little bit. I'm aware that today's Good Friday. It was one of the things that we talked about when we decided to have this call. And should we do this on Good Friday? Should we not do this on Good Friday? One of the things that I'll say is I never really got the paradox of Good Friday in the way that I'm getting it now. The paradox of Good Friday, the gift in the tragedy that it was back then in those times, and the gift and the tragedy that we're in today. So I'm just really mindful of that paradox of this word Good Friday with the, for that group of people, the death of Jesus and the rising of, that's just this paradox. So what I'd like to do now is shift over to Geffen, and we're going to let Geffen share a little bit of her experience and what's been going on for her around this time. So welcome, Geffen.
Thank you so much. I would like to acknowledge that for me, it really helps to take a few breaths before the performer parts try to take over. And so I'm just going to invite everyone to indulge me in taking a breath or two. Just be so supportive. Thank you. And Frank, thank you so much for the lead in. It's my intention is to share a story that is very, very real. It happened just a few days ago, and just a little bit of context of why it was so poignant, and it still is. My family came to the United States before I was 5 years old, so at around 4.5, from the Middle East. And I didn't know anything about Christianity or other faith practices other than the little bubble that was my origin. And life completely changed for this little girl to come to a new country, a new language, a new culture, and other formats of expressing devotion. And it was very challenging to be poor and to be in a single parent household with 3 siblings. So my mother worked 4 jobs, and it's no joke, we were kind of on our own. So school was the safe haven of regularity. And the hardest times for me as a child growing up were school holidays and these things called vacation. So we didn't have vacation. We would stay in our apartment, and it seemed like people would do other things. They would go and have experiences, and they'd come back and they'd be tan or talk about extended family. And then these holidays that were considered national holidays weren't what my personal family in our little bubble did. And so I quickly became aware of some shame and embarrassment of our weird traditions, but also very aware of being excluded from what was going on around me. So in comes my protective management system and develops a hyper competent capacity to just be capable. I learned to clean really well, organize, and then, growing up, that developed into a skill set that made me very desirable in organizations and other professional expressions. But what I didn't realize what was hiding underneath that strong competence. So with the coronavirus and sheltering in place, quarantine, 3 things happened that feel really relevant. The first is my career took off about 5 years ago leading transformational retreats. And I'd be on the road for 7 out of 12 months. So it was my whole life. And it's like the emergency brake got pulled on a fast moving train when we realized quarantine was coming into place and everything stopped. It's like the sound of quiet got louder. And it was shocking for my system. Um, but what I didn't expect was there is no virtual work for me. Live retreats are not transferable to Zoom as much as we've attempted to do a little bit. And so I've had more time, more than is comfortable for my management system internally. Rest for me used to be a 4-letter word. Like we don't do that. So at the beginning it was, okay, we're gonna do more cleaning and organizing, we're gonna rest. And once that came in for a landing and more space was showing up than any competence could override, I realized there was a big holiday coming up for my culture, and I wasn't getting any invitations. That's not unusual. But now there was this awareness that people are reaching out to family. There's all this virtual ease of connection, and something in me was aware that there's a possibility for a new way, maybe mending bridges that I had very cleverly tried to destroy as a child. And I heard about a virtual family gathering that was happening with people from all over the world connected to my personal human lineage. But I heard about it quite after the fact that it was already underway and being organized, and clearly I wasn't being invited. But because I found out and I was given the opportunity to consider participating, I heard inside a voice, a little young, kind of peeping over the top voice that said, "This could be fun. We don't have to wear pants. We don't have to get dressed up. Like, we could just show up for an hour. Let's do it." And there was enough self-energy in my system that heard that and said, "Let's do it." So I reached out and said yes. And almost as instantly as I heard about the gathering, the surprise in my response was met with, we don't really think that's going to work, Geffen. And so I was basically uninvited. And what I didn't expect was the crashing cascade of my protective system as this part of me lurched into the emptiness. And I recognized loneliness, probably something I haven't touched since I was very little.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for the tools of IFS, because I could be here in my home, my safe sanctuary, with me being the adult, loving, caring one that could ask the managers to give some space for this sensation that felt so new to have an opportunity to show itself to me. So I am surprised to say that ultimately, though this has been a very challenging surprise to my system, I feel more alive during a pandemic than I have ever felt before, particularly because of the willingness to stay with what seems like potential annihilation. And there's aliveness on the other side of that. Just breath and patience and care and a slow, gentle opportunity to update that little girl in me that really wants to connect, and giving her an opportunity to connect with one that really wants to connect with her. So I'll pause there. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone watching and listening is well and safe.
Great. Thank you so much, Geffen. I so appreciate you being able to share in that way and making yourself vulnerable to us in our community in that way. I just see you and feel you and hear you. So beautiful. So thank you so much for doing that. You brought to light this really important piece that all of us, I'm not going to say all of us, but that many of us I know are experiencing is this isolation and the loneliness. Um, it's something that's really, I've been grappling with too myself in this. I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. I keep saying, when am I going to have a chance to crochet or do a jigsaw puzzle, you know? And I'm aware that my strong managerial system is also very much at play and keeping me from some of what you did a beautiful job of expressing, is that aloneness and isolation. You know, it's one of the things that I've been very curious about in this whole pandemic situation, because I always know that there's opportunity for growth and expansion, as you've talked about so beautifully. And I haven't understood, because I haven't understood why isolation is important and helpful for us. Like, what are we supposed to learn from being alone? What are we supposed to learn from being alone? Love and connection is the most important thing in my worldview. So I just really appreciate the way you brought to light the value, and the learning and the growth that can come when we're forced to stop and to be with ourselves in this different kind of way. So thank you so much, for sharing your story in that way. Um, Thank you. I'm also aware, because it really has been something that is, been confusing to me, um, because I'm such a connected person, because we all are so connected and resilient as human beings. I've been so mindful with this forced stop and isolation, the way the human spirit is so resilient, the way people are reaching out in the midst of forced isolation, even putting themselves at risk, right, to connect in this way. And somebody had said to me, which was really, helpful for me to grasp, what are we supposed to learn by this forced isolation, other than what Geffen was able to share with us, being with ourselves in that way. I'm also experiencing the value of learning in contrast. Like, I actually do appreciate and value connection so much more as it's been ripped away. So it's the not having it that has also allowed me to appreciate it that much more. Like, I didn't think that's the way the learning would go necessarily for me, but I think we're all learning. There's enormous opportunities right now, as we just heard, to learn through what this pandemic is forcing us to do in this isolated kind of way. I wanted to say, I know that there's a lot of chats coming up right now, and I really am appreciative of the people that are interested in sharing and things like this. I'm not sure if we're going to have time or not to address some of the questions for people outside, so we'll see we'll see how this goes. I just wanted to just name that before we moved on. One of the other things that I'm also aware of in this forced stop, is what's happening to the environment, what's happening to our world, the ways pollution has changed, the ways the smog is lifting. There's fish in the canals and the oceans. I'm mindful of, the number of fatalities around fatal car accidents has dramatically decreased, for example. So that those opportunities for growth in this forced stop. I keep thinking, in our little family, that we're living, Little Women. Little Women, the movie that just came out recently, I know it's been done many times, was filmed in my little town of Harvard. So it was kind of fun to watch that movie, one of our family nights. And I kind of feel like we're in Little Women land. We stay at home, we do walks, we homeschool. It's like we've been pulled back into a simpler time in a way that part of me feels guilty about this, but it's been better than ever in some ways. Our relationships and our family time has been better than ever. Been a part of me that's felt guilty for appreciating some of the jewels that have come of this when I know there are so many people suffering in the world. And that's a hard polarity for me to sit with. I'm aware that quarantining is a luxury, that it's not everyone that even has the option to stockpile food and stay home for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks because they can't. They're losing so much. So it's very hard to sit with this range of the gifts we're experiencing, as well as the global tragedy that we're all experiencing on many different levels. So having that been said, and speaking of global tragedies, I'm going to ask Marushka to now join us and tell us a little bit about her story and what she's sitting with. So thank you, Marushka, for joining.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you. So can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So I really appreciate being here with all of you. And I'm going to talk about legacy burdens, my own legacy burden around being an only child of 2 Holocaust survivors who are no longer here. And, you know, one of the main beliefs that that stood out for me when I was working with the legacy burdens a long time ago was the fear of standing out. So doing this kind of thing is very, very challenging for me. And I think that the reason why I want to do this more now is that, you know, like you said, Frank, I have this feeling and need to connect with more people because of the isolation and, you know, wanting to hear people's stories and tell my own, because I believe that bearing witness to each other and each other's stories is very healing. That's what's healing. So when I share my story, I feel like I'm being healed and being received. And I'm hoping that when I share, you have something from it as well, that you can relate to it in your own way. So, you know, I have 2 parts. One part is I want to teach about legacy burdens, but I know this isn't the time for it. And the other part is, all right, I'll get into my story already. I think what's coming up for me now in the present moment, or what was, you know, kind of like an anxiety that I'm not really aware of when things are running normally. And that anxiety was really kind of triggered by my son, who's a doctor and is going to ICU now. They're putting him in ICU, and his fiance as well. She's in another hospital. And so, you know, even though they say that young people, you know, don't die from it, it was terrifying and still is. But, and then I kind of go back to, you know, the Holocaust and this transgenerational trauma that I definitely feel that I got through epigenetics. And, you know, I never knew my grandparents from either set. I never had grandparents that I knew because they were both, you know, both sets were killed. And that's been a major source of loss for me. Yeah, and so I have this little family because of an old, and you know, thinking of losing them, and my other son's in Colorado, so he's not near me. My doctor's son is at least living near me. He's kind of cavalier about the virus, so he goes and he spends some time with his friends still, just a few friends. So this level of anxiety has, I'm comparing the pandemic to the Holocaust. And
Yes.
like one of the comparisons I feel is this loss of connection that, we're all going through by not being able to connect person to person. The loss of identity that was stolen from, my family. The loss of life as we know it, right? So everything is different now and maybe will be. I can imagine that there are restaurants that I've been frequenting that won't survive. And, the positive thing is we are thinking about people who are not as privileged as we are much more. I'm thinking about, I'm sending money to the person who cleans my house because she just had a baby. And, this survivor guilt, my parents had survivor guilt because they survived and none of their families survived. And this guilt, Frank, that you talk about, like having more than other people. So, I think that's what's been coming up for me. And then, this fear of death and this big not knowing. And a lot of people are very comfortable around not knowing. And I practice not knowing as a tenant, where I sit and meditate and be with the not knowing. And so I'm a little bit, more acclimated to it, but still, it still has been anxiety provoking for me. Yeah, so I was at a virtual Passover Seder, and one of the woman who actually was Mike Elfin's wife, asked, "What's your higher power? What's your higher power?" And I think that when I think about it, my whole journey into legacy burdens and going to Auschwitz and talking to my relatives for the first time in like 2012, it took me like 58 years to go to Poland, right? I was so freaked out about it. My parents felt totally betrayed by their country where they had loved Poland before, So I was thinking about what my higher power is. And I think what my higher power is, what makes me feel connected when I'm feeling disconnected. And when I do my parts meditation every day, I invite my ancestors to come and be around me. And I feel like being in touch with all the ancestors that died. I don't feel so alone ever. Like, I can go to the CVS and my ancestors will come with me, So that's the way that I feel kind of connected to source. And of course, practicing gratitude and taking walks. Yeah. So I think that's it for now.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mariska.
And our community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You bring to light really important, powerful pieces for me, and do a lovely job of crossing the generations, right? Talking about the worry and the fear connected to your children and the potential loss and danger that they're in, and then what you experience on the other end being, members of the Holocaust and surviving that transgenerational legacy. You're brave enough to mention the loss piece for me in that way, because I think that's something that we're all feeling on some level. I know I'm feeling it on some level, and I almost don't dare go there. So I'm really glad you speak of it and spoke of it for us and all of our community. You know, I'm not connected in just, you know, logistically to my family in this way. They're in Chicago, I'm here. And I have this panic around, oh my gosh, something happens to them. We can't visit. If God forbid they perish, we have no funeral. Like, you know, your brains go to all of these really scary places of unknown, because this is such new territory for us. So I really appreciate you kind of naming that, because it's something that I know I've been feeling and, you know, sit with gently. I know it comes up for me when, you know, we'll watch a TV program and I'm just bawling my eyes out at the drop of a hat. It's just like, it's like right under the surface for me. Like I'm a pretty emotional person in general, but I just have been crying so much more easily around any potential loss. Like Modern Family had their last episode, whoever watched that TV show. And I was just, you know, give me another Kleenex, give me another Kleenex. And I'm like, Frank, is this really about Modern Family? Like, let's get real here. So you speak to something that I think is very important for all of us around the loss in that way, but also the beauty in the way we can stay connected even when people are gone. You know, I love the way you say that my ancestors are with me in the CBS, and I love, you know, I think that's one of the things we're all here to learn, is how to be connected in different ways, you know, and holding those connections feels really, really important to me. You know, one of the things I've heard, which was kind of shocking to me, and this was relative to the Zoom thing. You know, many therapists are now switching over to any form of virtual therapy if you're able to do that, right? And I find it exhausting. I'm like, why is this so tight? I could see 8 hours of clients in a day and I get energized by that connection. And I do 8 hours of Zoom and I'm like exhausted. And I read this thing that was fascinating. It was a study done, I think at Stanford or something, that in fact, it's too much connection, that we're looking at each other's eyes for 50 minutes, that we're constantly seeing each other face to face, close up. And that's not how we normally connect. That they said in an average meeting, you might look at somebody for 5 or 10 minutes, not for 50 straight. So that our systems are being rewired in this kind of new, intense connection kind of thing, and that it's overwhelming for our physiology. So I thought that was really kind of an interesting thing as we learn about the different ways we're connecting, the different ways we hold each other, the different ways we're able to be with one another. So what I'd like to do now is switch over. So thank you again, Mariska, to our last storyteller, which is Andre. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience and what she's been going through. So welcome, Andre.
Thank you very much, Frank. Marushka, I just want to say that you really hit me, and all you guys did, all your stories. But I work at the College of Nursing here. I'm in Bozeman, Montana, and you know, my heart is with you and with your children. And as a mom, I feel all that. And interestingly, one of the gals, this is a side note to my story, but one of the gals I work with is she's from the Blackfeet tribe. And you know, what you're talking about, I've been watching so closely as we've had some healthcare workers test positive up in the Assiniboine, and we have like 7 tribes here in Montana. And you know, the threat to them and to their population and their legacy burden and all that. And you brought up a lot in me, because I studied, you know, their history, and I know so many people that are Native Americans, and a whole different legacy burden and so forth. But you really hit me. So thank you for sharing, and thanks for having me here, Frank. I reached out because I needed support, and unlike a lot of you, I'm relatively new to this. I only started IFS therapy a couple years ago. I'm 54 years old, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I didn't understand, why I couldn't form relationships in life, why I walked alone through so much of my life, why my relationships would fail. And when I went to seek help, I thought, hey, in a couple months I'll be good to go and I'll be done. And it's a couple years down the road, and I have grown immensely, and I have been able to face a very traumatic childhood, um, and I have spent many, many years in situations of complete isolation. Whether it was in a house full of 6 kids where I couldn't escape emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, um, whether it was being in remote Alaska for 5 years in a very emotionally abusive relationship, or whether it was being a single mom for 10 years, raising my 2 children alone with absolutely no support in a very small remote town. So for me, when the last couple of years have been so transformational, I can't even begin to explain. But what has happened is myself has emerged, and I didn't even know myself wasn't there. But most of my life, it's been this little Andre who was out there, and I was always a little scrapper. I was always getting into fights, and I only knew one way to react to a threat, and that was just with absolute rage and everything I had. And I didn't understand all these parts that were in me, and it was all very disorienting when I first started. And but it's brought me so far. And I started a new job about 6 months ago, and it's been really rewarding because I've finally been able to be there as 54-year-old Andre and not this little child. And I'm always telling my therapist, people really like me, and they think I'm funny, and it feels so good to make, and that connection was just like really amazing to me. And so for this situation to have come up when it did, I didn't understand what was going on till and we've been about 25 days in self-isolation here because I have an asthma history, as do my 2 children. I didn't understand what was going on until I started to get really, stressed out, and I was just snapping at my kids, and I was just angry, and I was so angry, and I couldn't understand. And I went for a drive one day after I was just being unreasonable with my son, and it took that for me to realize that, oh, that's right. That I'm trapped, and I know this feeling. I know what it is, whether it's to be trapped in the house, that I can't escape abuse, or whether it's to be trapped in an awful relationship, or trapped in a small town with absolutely no support and these 2 little lives I have to care for. And I've had to work through it the last couple of weeks with my therapist, but I understand that, all my systems just came in, and all my protectors just threw up these walls. And I went inside last week, and when I went inside, there was like this big castle. And I went in, and little Andre, that was like 2 or 3 years old, was sitting on the floor in this castle, and it was just these big walls, and just a little bit of sunlight coming in through the top, kind of dappling on the floor. And I just sat there with her, and I could see this little child who was unaware of this threat out there, which in this case is the pandemic. But my protectors didn't understand that it was this pandemic. All they knew was that my whole life I had been under siege, and that threat could come when I least expected it, and that this is what happens. And it was so disorienting. And I guess I just, it was so disheartening because I couldn't, like myself, I couldn't get enough self energy, and I couldn't, and I worked this last week too, and I'm really struggling. And I've, had dissociation episodes in conflict with my husband, where I can't pull out of it. And the worst case was a few days ago when I sat down by the fire in the evening, and I crawled up to the top of a tree. And I'm 54, and I did it because I I just wanted to like look out and like see if the world was a little less scary, because that's what I used to do when I was a little kid. I'd just go to the top of the trees and I'd try to hide, and because I wouldn't want to be seen or anybody to find me. And so it's interesting because you guys all talk about needing connection and stuff, and for me, you know, I don't need connection. All my parts tell me I don't need anybody, and then I'm better off without anybody. And so it's just been it's been a real struggle, and it's completely cut me off from my husband, who I've been with for almost 10 years now. um, and anyway, that's my story, and I didn't really have it, you know, thought out well, so I just told you how my heart feels, and I appreciate you letting me talk, Frank.
Speaking for your story, honestly, because it really does show the range here. So when we met yesterday, I was like so excited to have you here, to be able to be one of the panelists in this, because you talk about, I mean, that you talk about that double trauma. You know, you're getting triggered in the present with what's happening in the past, and clearly you're so resilient, and you've been through so much and have come so far, and it still can get the best of us, and that's so real and that's so honest, and I really appreciate you being vulnerable enough to be able to share that with us. You know, it really brings to light for me, Andre, like the value of our protectors. Like, they are jumping in when they need to jump in, and they do these heroic things for us, and thank God for them, because we would not be able to survive, I'm so clear, without their energy and without their protective nature. So it really, you know, that we hold the duality of the present day trauma and the past trauma that gets activated, but also the duality of the value of our protectors, the ways they can maybe get in, you know, cause trouble in our lives, and the ways they've been so heroic in helping us and saving us. So I really, really appreciate you speaking to that and naming that in such an honest and courageous way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just feel so blessed to have met you all, and to have you all be able to have shared this with me. It's kind of going so much better than I had anticipated. I knew it would, because I met you all, and I just knew that you'd be able to speak from the heart. And I really do hope that everybody out there has resonated in some ways. I know I've been resonating a lot with all of what you've said on many, many different levels. What I'd like to do now is I'd like us to collectively do a meditation together. You know, we're all in this together, and I'd like us all to kind of take a minute and to go inside. And as we do go inside, I want to see if we're able to feel the collective nature of our joining together. The ways that we've all shown up to either listen or to speak for our experiences in this present day. I want to see if you can check in with your parts right now, and to just see if they can share with you personally a little bit about what's been activated for them here in the present, as well as in the past. So just see if you can listen to what's happening to your parts in the present. See if you can validate them for their reactions and their responses. Let them know that how they're feeling and reacting is totally okay. And if you do get why they're feeling this way, just give them some appreciation and value for the ways they're trying to respond. Do they see you? Do they know that you're here separate from them? Can they receive some of your love and support in this moment? Are they willing to share with you at least even just a little bit about the origins of their pain, of their reactions, of their responses? Can they just share a little bit of how this all started for them? Again, can they sense and feel your presence? Let them know if they're willing to let you take the lead, they won't have to take on any new burdens in the present day. If they can let you show up at the fore, they won't have to accumulate any more today. Can they trust that? Can you give them an intention that you will take this opportunity to maybe heal another layer, another round from your history, so that they will be less burdened as you move forward in your life? Can they feel the power of yourself in this moment? Can we all together collectively feel the power of our self-energy as we came together today and shared our story and experiences? Can we create a circle of strength together? And can we send that strength and power from ourselves within out to the world at large? We are all capable and powerful. individually as well as collectively. We are resilient. We are strong. And as we bask in the collective self-energy, just thank your parts. See if they'll let you lead. And when you're ready, you can transition slowly back to our space together. Self-energy is the beacon of light in this time. Self-energy is the way we're going to heal our parts individually, as well as heal this world collectively. I want to thank the people that showed up today as participants, as well as storytellers, for sharing their story with us. Together, we are experiencing trauma. Together, we can tell our stories. Together, we can heal. And together, we will be able to grow as a world to have more peace, unity, love, and connection. Thank you all from the bottom of my heart for joining and sharing in this time together. Okay. So Sarah, are we, because people are leaving.
Yeah, everyone's just saying thank you, and
Okay.
you can just sign off when you're ready.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you all once again. I really appreciate it. This kind of was beyond my expectations in the way that you kind of showed up and shared from your heart. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I trusted this was happening in the way it was supposed to, and it was just beautiful and perfect. So our paths will cross again, I'm sure, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Yes,
Thanks,
be well.
everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Mhm. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.